Good evening, and thank you all so much for coming out this evening. My name is Brian Adams, and I'm a professor of environmental science. And on behalf of Greenfield Community College and the Green Campus Committee, I would like to welcome you to GCC this evening. Many thanks to our four wonderful panelists who promised to make this evening informative and inspirational. Happy Earth Day. A quick correction, if I may. There were a few orders of magnitude missing from some of the Earth Day announcements sent out. If we're counting April's, this is not the 45th Earth Day, but the 4.5 billionth Earth Day. So my apologies for that mistake. This past Monday, we celebrated Patriots' Day, which commemorates, as most of you know, the battles of Lexington and Concord in 1775. 240 years later, alarm bells are ringing again throughout Massachusetts. Although this time it's not the British are coming. The British are coming. It's Kinder Morgan is coming. Tennessee Gas is coming. 239 years ago, in 1776, Thomas Paine wrote in his rousing pamphlet, Common Sense, "It is the good fortune of many to live distant from the scene of sorrow." Well, folks, that distance is closing rapidly. The fossil fuel wars are coming home. The proposed Northeast Energy Direct Pipeline would transport highly pressurized fracked natural gas from Pennsylvania to markets in the Northeast and then export at least some of it abroad. This new line will run across 16 rural towns in western Massachusetts before entering New Hampshire and heading east. Tennessee Gas, Kinder Morgan, proposes to do this with or without landowners' permission, digging through orchards, farms, backyards, and highly sensitive ecological areas with conservation restrictions. In this era of potentially catastrophic climate change and extreme energy extraction, Tennessee Gas's proposal seems to many of us a giant leap backward in the race to save the planet. Just when we desperately need to rethink our consumptive lifestyles, ramp up energy efficiency, and increase the use of renewables, Tennessee Gas wants to double down on frack gas with all the issues, drastically expand the fossil fuel infrastructure, bring us gas we don't need in a place we don't want, and release even more heat-trapping methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Truth be told, we're all fossil fuel addicts, and this hole we're in, this addiction, is frying the planet. We should all know by now the first rule of holes. When you're in one, stop digging. Tennessee Gas has clearly missed the memo on that one. The good news is that a lot of folks are drawing the line in the sand on this one, channeling Gandalf the Grey in his epic battle with the Balrog in the mines of Moria and shouting, "Go back to the shadow, you cannot pass." We have four of those wonderful people on our panel tonight. To my left, Katie Eisman. To my immediate right, Jim Cutler. To my far left, Representative Paul Mark. And, Richard Canoff here to my far right, Jim. Let me introduce them in the order that they will speak. Each of them are going to have up to 15 minutes, but they probably won't take that long. Then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience as well. So rather than introducing each of them before they go on, I think I'll just introduce all of them right now. First up, to my far right, Jim Cutler. Jim began his career as a solar thermal engineer in 1981. In 2009, he moved back to Western Mass to the town of Ashfield, where he serves as Ashfield's town energy manager. In 2014, after being informed that the pipeline may bisect his property, he co-founded Hilltown Community Rights and joined the executive boards of Mass Plan, which is the Massachusetts Pipeline Awareness Network, and Plan for the Northeast. To my far left, Paul Mark represents the 2nd Berkshire District in the Massachusetts House of Representatives. His district includes us here in Greenfield and 16 towns. He has pledged to work hard to stop the pipeline.
And I like that he described me as far left.
Also to my left, and maybe far left as well, Katie Eisman of Cummington holds a law degree from Georgetown University Law Center and a bachelor's degree in environmental science from UMass and Amherst. She now heads Mass Plan, which is a coalition of organizations and groups opposed to the Kinder Morgan pipeline. To my immediate right, and also to the left, grasping that, Richard Canoff is Energy and Regulatory Counsel for Plan New England and Mass Plan. He is a partner in the Boston-based firm Burns and Levinson, and previously served as an assistant attorney general for Massachusetts, specializing in energy matters. So let's begin. Jim?
So good evening. My name is Jim Cutler, and I am a homeowner living in Ashfield, Massachusetts, where Kinder Morgan is hoping to construct a 36-inch frac gas pipeline through the middle of my property, which includes protected habitat and land conserved through Article 97. I first heard about this from a neighbor who had received a visit from Tennessee Gas Pipeline Company, LLC, the Kinder Morgan subsidiary who would be doing the actual construction. TGP wanted to survey our parcels to determine where the pipeline would be buried. It wasn't a question of if, it was only a question of how. I refused, so did my neighbors. But I wondered about all of the other folks in Ashfield who were being targeted for this pipeline. Who were they? What did they know? More importantly, what didn't they know? I decided then that I would find out everything there was to know about this project so that I could pass it on to others who would need that information in order to make an informed decision about whether or not they would allow it on their property. And so on April 4th, just a little over 1 year ago, I invited all of the impacted landowners in Ashfield to a presentation on this pipeline project, and just about everybody came to learn the details of the Northeast Energy Direct Pipeline. And those details were sobering. 100-foot wide, clear-cut swath the entire length of the route. 80,000 horsepower compressor stations spewing toxins and endocrine disruptors. Destroyed habitats. Violated insurance policies and mortgages. And life-threatening danger from explosions. I didn't have to give these homeowners my personal view on the subject. The information itself from industry and government sources was more than enough to show everyone in that room why running a 36-inch pipeline through some of the most pristine and protected habitats in Massachusetts was a very bad idea. From that first meeting grew our local organization called Hilltown Community Rights, where we crafted anti-pipeline and community rights resolutions that were passed almost unanimously at special town meeting with Representatives Stephen Kulik and Ben Downing in attendance. During this time, a larger statewide group called the Massachusetts Pipeline Awareness Network, which you will hear about more shortly, was being formed. I was honored to be asked to join that group and to bring this fight to the State House and beyond. One of the central concepts that I have learned during the course of this struggle is the importance of accurate information. We are not just in a fight over the use of antiquated fossil fuel as an energy source. We are in a fight to the finish over the accurate and honest dissemination of information. Since January 2014, I and others have witnessed in person the use of fear and the wholesale fabrication of data to manipulate the people affected by this project into believing that they will get good-paying jobs, cheaper electric bills, tax revenue for their towns, safe operation, and a caring corporate neighbor. None of these things are true. None of these things has ever been true. Every time Kinder Morgan comes to a town to extol the virtues of their wondrous pipeline, we are there to remind members of the audience that jobs for these projects are almost always outsourced, that our electric bills never go down, that tax revenues promised are always massively reduced through abatements, that pipelines all over the country are blowing up with alarming regularity, and that Kinder Morgan does not have it within their corporate mindset to even understand what it means to care about human beings. What I have discovered, and this is the most thrilling thing of all, is that truth matters to people. Not everybody, but the numbers of people who do value truth over immediate gratification are growing. And it will be this very thing that I think will help us prevail over hubris, greed, and short-sightedness. Kinder Morgan cannot walk into a meeting anywhere along the pipeline route and prevail. Kinder Morgan cannot conduct a meeting with legislators without being admonished for their inconsistent and questionable answers. Even the Federal Energy Regulatory Commissioners themselves long for the days when people didn't care about what they were doing. Those days are over, and they are not coming back. Today, more homeowners are denying survey permissions than ever before. Today, more homeowners are writing to FERC and their legislators than ever before. Today, more towns are passing resolutions banning pipelines than ever before because people have woken up to the realities of these horrific infrastructures, and they recognize the difference between what comes out of the mouths of oil and gas company PR men and the truth. What you are going to hear tonight is what we have learned from painstaking research and a dedication to honest dialogue. It is our hope and intention to provide you with the tools that will help us win this fight. Thank you.
Representative Mark?
Well, thank you to the organizers for putting this together, and thank you to GCC for hosting, and thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel. I'm honored to be here. I was asked to talk a little bit about what I'm seeing politically, and then what I understand, how I understand the process, especially as it relates to state government and how we interact with the federal government and FERC and such. Just for anyone who doesn't know, so I represent what's called the 2nd Berkshire District, which begins in Pittsfield in the west and stretches through the hill towns of Dalton and Windsor and up through Hawley and Coleraine, includes Greenfield, and goes all the way to Northfield on the eastern part of my district. So I represent a large number of the towns that would potentially be affected by the pipeline, including, luckily enough, Windsor and Northfield, which are both the sites proposed for the compressor station. So I've been hearing a lot about this from the people of my district ever since it was first proposed. And it was a good thing I heard about it from the people of my district, because Kinder Morgan, the company, never actually reached out to me until months after I was hearing about people's concerns about surveying, people's concerns about meetings that were happening in places not in my district but in the area, maybe Athol or Orange. There were meetings happening, and at the same time, though, Kinder Morgan had never reached out to at least one of the local legislators who covered a great deal of the area. The first time I met with Kinder Morgan was probably last June, and this had already been an issue for quite a while down in the State House. We met as a delegation, and we weren't particularly impressed with what we heard. In the district, I'd say more than 90% of the people that have contacted me about this project have been opposed to it. Overwhelmingly, the towns that I represent that would be affected have voted resolutions in opposition to it. Our congressman, Jim McGovern, here in the eastern part of my district, in the Greenfield Northfield area, he's publicly come out against it as a federal representative. Senators Warren and Markey have expressed a lot of concern. They're trying to help Congressman McGovern try to fight this where they actually may have some power at the federal level. And then the local legislative delegation, almost all of us have come out publicly against the project as well. So that's politically. Now, in the legislature, we don't hear a lot about this from people from other parts of the state. I don't think it's become a big issue in the rest of the state yet. It was starting to get a lot of traction when the proposed route was all the way along Route 2, all the way to Dracut. And when the route changed into New Hampshire, some of that advocacy kind of died down from my colleagues to the east, unfortunately. But we'll try to revive that as it becomes necessary. So now the process, as we're understanding it in the legislature, is that FERC will make the final decision. It's up to FERC. It's a federal entity. They don't answer to anybody, basically, and they're going to come up with the decision. And they're supposedly basing their decision on economics, not necessarily the environment. There's at least 4 pipelines that are proposed for the state. This one being one of them, and the one we're most concerned with, obviously, in this region. At the state level, the power to have a say in this case rests with the State Department of Public Utilities. The DPU has the right to serve as an intervener before FERC. So basically, they'll be like a lawyer arguing a case before FERC, who is the jury, the judge and jury. The DPU will take its direction from the governor. So now what I've heard from the governor has been kind of a mixed signal, mixed message. I've been hearing, I've never heard it from his lips or from anyone from his agency, from his executive branch agencies, but I've heard he's against the Kinder Morgan Tennessee pipeline in this region. But I did hear him say with my own ears when he was in Pittsfield visiting that he was shocked that pipeline capacity hadn't been expanded in the state 4 or 5 years ago. And he said this in Pittsfield in response to a question about the pipeline possibly coming. So I don't know really what he thinks. I know that the Secretary of Energy is a former representative who was elected with me, who served with me. His name is Matt Beaton. He's out of Shrewsbury. I know he's a pretty reasonable guy. I know he does his homework. He comes from a renewable energy background himself. He has, I want to say, degrees in engineering. He's been in the field for a long time. But that being said, I don't know where he stands on pipeline issues. I don't know where the governor is going to stand on this particular pipeline issue. And we haven't gotten any kind of a clear response from him at any time. As far as the legislature, our power, I feel that our power is probably going to be very, very limited. We can't pass a law that says DPU shall do this, because guess what? When we pass a law, the executive branch carries out the law, and they're an independent, co-equal branch of the government. So we can't mandate them to do something. We could pass a law all day, and he could choose not to enforce it and do his own thing. We can't make the decision for him. There have been bills filed that would try to hold up the process, make it more difficult, make it less attractive for Kinder Morgan to want to proceed on a project like this. But we will have the authority to have oversight hearings. Our senator to the western part of Franklin County is Senator Downing. He chairs the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy. His committee has oversight over the DPU and over the Department of Energy. They can have oversight hearings and have them explain and have people come in for public comment, either in the lead up to the DPU making a decision or after they've made a decision. We can force them to explain their rationale, that kind of thing. The place where we may have power, where we are actually unique as a state in Massachusetts, is what they call Article 97 of the state constitution. And what Article 97 says is that for land to be taken by the state, there must be a roll call vote, recorded vote, where 2/3 of the members of the House and Senate must approve. So the way Article 97 has always worked, and the way it's meant to work, is if the local representative or senator says, this is my district, the people here are opposed to this, we don't want this land being taken, it is supposed to die. It is not supposed to. There is not supposed to be a way that you can get 2/3 majority of a vote over the wishes of the local people. And if this came up for a vote tomorrow, the Western Massachusetts delegation would say, we don't want this to happen, and we expect that the rest of the state would honor that because it could be them next. And if people in Western Massachusetts remember the Quabbin Reservoir, Article 97 is designed to prevent something like that from ever happening. If the local area does not want something, it is not supposed to be taken. So every Article 97 vote I've ever been part of has always been unanimous. It's always been 100% unanimous. Now, there's been talk of Kinder Morgan, FERC, someone trying to find a way around us using our Article 97 authority. And a gentleman from the audience who I know pretty well asked me, would there be a way to force a vote on Article 97 even if there's no land being taken? And the answer is no. We can't just take a vote unless there's land being taken. And the other side of this is if we do have a vote and we reject it with an Article 97 vote and then FERC still overrules us, what would happen? Well, no one knows because, like I said, no other state has this. No other state has this as a precedent. So I think it would end up in court. And to me, where Article 97 is an amendment, it's an article of our state constitution, that's a pretty strong statement. And I know there's a lot of concern, a lot of talk. Everyone's worried about states' rights, especially from different parts of the country. And I think that would be a really powerful argument to make here as well. I'm going to end with that. I'm sorry it's not good information and it's not a lot of helpful information at this point, but we'll be ready to answer questions and engage in the discussion. And if there is anything that can be done, your local legislators, your federal legislators in this region are going to fight to find a way to make it happen. And thank you all for everything you're doing, because I think it does make a difference, and this kind of opposition I don't think has ever been seen by this company before. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Mark. I'm very glad to have heard what you had to say. I think that we will have some good news for you on more places. There's much more power, much more going on at the state level that people don't realize is even happening. But first, I just want to talk about the FERC process that a lot of you, I'm sure, know a lot about, but some of you may know nothing about. So just so people know where we are in the federal process. FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which does oversee the process that was initiated by Kinder Morgan in September. Now, as we all know, we've been at this fight for over a year now. So leading up to the FERC proceedings starting, there was already much more opposition than had been anticipated, and they actually delayed by a month about their pre-filing that they had planned. But they did go ahead and do what they call a pre-filing, which is before they file a formal application for our certificate of public convenience and necessity, they opted to use this procedure where they try to get as much information as they can from all of the communities and all of the landowners along the whole route so that they can address any environmental issues and improve their project so that it can be streamlined and moved through faster. So that's what the pre-filing process is about, and that's why so many people are not allowing surveying and not handing over information to Kinder Morgan, because that, as I said, helps them improve their application when they file it. So that's where we are still. It's in the middle of this pre-filing process. An application they plan to file in September, they've said, although they've also said fourth quarter of this year. So they're starting to inch that out a little bit as well. The first formal part of the pre-filing process after they filed are their maps and a general explanation of where the route is and what the project is going to involve. The first formal time when we could engage in the process and meet one-on-one with representatives of Kinder Morgan were the open houses, and there was one held in this room, and they were held along the route, and people came with their questions, and the company representatives were very evasive and managed to provide almost no information to anyone who asked. A lot of them were kids who were hired for the weekend to, wear the little polo shirts and deflect, and they literally would point and say, go across the room and ask that person over there, and people were sent on a wild goose chase with no answers. And so we can talk more about that process if anybody wants to, but that was the first formal event. And then the next stage is they filed their resource report. They have 13 resource reports that create an environmental report, which will form the basis for FERC to file an environmental impact statement. So literally the company says, this is our report, here it is FERC, and it's sort of a draft for FERC, and then FERC gets some input, and that's the environmental impact statement that is required by the federal process. Now, what has to happen is there have to be scoping hearings that FERC holds, and they will be along the route. They originally wanted them to be in February and March, and as you see, we haven't had them yet. They might be as early as May, but it looks like they're being pushed down the road as well. And delay is good. So anything that, pushes us out a little bit more gives us time to do other things. But at those scoping hearings is where we have the opportunity to say, we know that this is what Kinder Morgan said about the environment, but have you looked at all of these other issues? And we ask detailed questions about the resources that we know are out there and make sure that they're doing a thorough job of identifying possible problems, both environmental, from water resources to soils to also socioeconomic, all the kinds of impacts that there could be on our communities. So that is coming down the line, and within the next few months, presumably. Meanwhile, all this time, we have been in an informal comment period. There is an online there's a FERC website where people file comments, and there have been thousands of comments filed on the docket for this proceeding. Even though it's informal, it's not an official comment period, people have been listing, putting in comments from filing their town's resolutions that oppose the pipeline to giving their personal stories about how it affects their lives and disrupt, even not having the pipeline, just fighting the pipeline is disrupting their lives, to what it would do on their personal property, and talking about energy policy, and it runs the gamut. But what is important is that people are commenting, as Jim said, and this is part of a bigger picture, which is that these pipelines are being proposed all over the country. If you look at the maps of the proposed pipelines, it's metastasizing all over the place. And what we have is, because of the Marcellus Shale, the availability of the shale gas, there's a supply glut. They're just pulling it out of the ground as fast as they can and looking for markets anywhere they can find them. So they have, found a few places around here where they think they can sell gas. I mean, we can talk about the Berkshire Gas moratorium that some of you may be affected by, but they want to build a pipeline that is far bigger than could serve any local need. So they have talked in their own filings about looking for export, for LNG exporters as potential customers, so it could be sent overseas. So that's the macro picture there. But getting back to the FERC proceeding, we can help people engage in the FERC process, and this isn't necessarily a how-to, but there are online, there are how-to comment on FERC is available, and we can talk afterwards about that. But I did want to mention, you had brought up the 16 towns, since it's been moved to New Hampshire. There are these lateral pipelines that are often left out of the conversation, but they're actually between Massachusetts and New Hampshire, it's about 50 municipalities that are directly affected, because once it gets to Drake, there's a lateral that extends almost to the coast, and there's another one just north of Worcester. So it's still in more populated areas, but they have been behind somewhat in getting engaged because they weren't approached, many of them, as soon as early as we were. So we're still helping these communities get involved the way we have been helping people in New Hampshire get involved. Another part of the picture this is going on at the State House, is there are presentations about this energy crisis that we are all facing. But nobody has actually, we have not seen blackouts or brownouts or any of these, this parade of horribles that have been, we've been forewarned about. It's, a lot of us think that these are scare tactics to bring on the pipeline, and some people are wondering whether that's the case with the moratorium that Berkshire Gas and Columbia Gas have imposed. Now, I have not studied the technical side. We're starting to have people look at the technical side of whether the pipeline is actually filled to capacity that serves this area. But even if it is, it's only at capacity at the very on the coldest days of the year, when the gas is being used the most, both for heating and for electric power plants. And so we need to have a solution now for places that rely on Berkshire Gas. And so one thing there's one place where I think that the state government can help to get involved is to help communities weatherize and insulate so that the peak demand is lessened, and also fixing the leaks. A lot of you have heard in the news about the leaks in the gas distribution system, and it's been estimated that 2.7% of all gas in the Commonwealth, or that might have been specifically in the Boston area and extrapolated out, but anyway, it's certainly enough gas to for more of those pizza ovens. There's often you read in the news about how somebody can't add another pizza oven. If you fix the leaks, and if you cut down on just gas just leaking out of people's roofs, there is already gas available. So that's one of the solutions that is out there right now that I think we should be working on for these communities in the Pioneer Valley that are directly affected. There are other state issues that I think we can maybe turn it over to Richard at this point to talk about where people can, where we are getting involved on the legal and regulatory level.
Richard Kanoff, and I'm a lawyer, and my primary job, and I'm delighted to be here, is to, as it relates to the pipeline, to oppose it. And I'm here to actually talk to you about some of the things that you can do and you should be aware of in your opposition to the pipeline. First thing I want to ask you, though, is how many of you are, like Jim, impacted by this pipeline on your property? How many of you are Columbia Gas customers? Anybody? Anybody Berkshire Gas customers? Anybody here in favor of the pipeline? I want to just note that a few people in the first row turned around to look. All right, according to Kinder Morgan, and this is from their own presentations, there's three things that they're really concerned about that are challenges for them in the construction, development, operation of this pipeline. The first one has been mentioned by the representative here, by Paul, and that's Article 97. And Article 97 is important because it's a constitutionally established challenge hoop that Kinder Morgan needs to address if it's a significantly protected land and it falls within Article 97 of the Constitution, then by law they're supposed to leave it alone. I'm going to simplify a little bit, but basically that's it, unless the legislature approves it by 2/3. So that's a significant hurdle. No one really knows if, in fact, there's opposition in the legislature to approving an Article 97 protected construction, what the courts will do with that. I'll put it that way. But it's an impediment, it's a challenge, it's something that we're hopeful that the legislators will continue to protect. It's your job to make sure that they do. It's your job to write to them, not only the legislator here, but others in the State House, to have your voice be heard in that respect. The other thing that Kinder Morgan has stated as a challenge is what's known in the legal world as precedent agreements, but more simply, they're contracts. And they're contracts that utilities need to have approved for the purchase, for the approval actually of pipeline capacity. So in order for this pipeline to get built, it has to be approved by the Department of Public Utilities, the DPU, which you've heard of, and in formal proceedings. And these proceedings have been filed in Massachusetts. And what Kinder Morgan, I'll talk about that in a couple seconds specifically, but what Kinder Morgan has said is that if it doesn't get approvals for gas capacity from the regulators, it won't be able to build the pipeline. So another way to say it is, if the economics of the pipeline are not supported because the regulators won't approve the pipeline, it won't get built. Another way to say it, and this is the takeaway, if the Department of Public Utilities does not approve these precedent agreements, this pipeline may not get built. In fact, it probably won't get built. There was an earnings call a couple days ago where Kinder Morgan was asked explicitly by investors to talk about the precedent agreement proceedings. And in that call, you don't even have to read between the lines. It was pretty obvious that they're aware if they don't have the economic support by the utilities for this pipeline, it's in trouble. So to come back to what matters here and for all of you, your regulators right now are charged with approving or disapproving this pipeline. There's proceedings which have been teed up recently over the last couple of weeks for approvals of this pipeline by Columbia Gas. That's why I asked about that. Berkshire Gas just the other day, and National Grid. There's also a proceeding that Plan is involved in New Hampshire, very similar for Liberty Utilities. And all of those regulators, both in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, have to approve this for this pipeline to be successful. So, mass regulators, mass stakeholders, you have another job to do. You can make your voice heard in these proceedings in front of the DPU in opposition to the pipeline. There's a public hearing in Boston scheduled for May 7th. With respect to Columbia National Grid, there'll be a public hearing also coming down the road shortly for Berkshire. One of the things that you can do when that public hearing gets noticed for Berkshire is ask that it be held out here. Why should all of you have to go to Boston? Have the regulators come out here. You can also ask that that happen for the other two proceedings. But they should certainly begin to understand that there's a significant presence in the Berkshires in opposition to this pipeline, and they need to hear from you about what your concerns are at the front end of those regulatory proceedings. And those regulatory proceedings are really going to look at alternatives to the pipeline. They're going to look at costs, and they're going to look at whether the pipelines are in the public interest. All very important things, and that has nothing to do with FERC, and Kinder Morgan is aware of that. That's a very important proceeding. The other thing that Kinder Morgan's concerned about is local permits, and because they do need in some way to pay attention to local communities, they need to get conservation commissions, but more important, they need state approvals for wetlands. For the 401 permitting process, that's a wetland permitting process, is not preempted by FERC. That's also going to be reviewed by your regulators, and important decisions are going to be made there that are going to have impacts on the pipeline. So what you have to pay attention to, and I think what you need to think about from a legal and a political perspective, is from a legal perspective, pay attention to the regulatory proceedings, support plan and its efforts to oppose the pipeline in those proceedings. They're very active in those, but they need your support to make that effective. But also communicate with your legislators, communicate with the governor. The governor is the person that controls, you've heard it here, the regulatory process. Let him know, let his cabinet know, let the executive branch here know your feelings in opposition to this pipeline, so that they know that there's consequences if their regulators approve it. The other thing I want to just say is that you're not alone. Katie mentioned that there's actually over 50 communities in Massachusetts and New Hampshire affected by this. New Hampshire legislators are very concerned about this as well. They've only had this in their lap for 4 months. You've had it for a lot longer than that. They're starting to organize. They're starting to have the same kind of meetings that you are. So although it may feel that you're isolated here in the western part of the state, you're not. And I'm from Boston. It's where I practice. There's a lot of activity there. There's activity in the east in Drake. There's activity in the east in Andover. There's activity in Methuen. There's activity in Wilmington. There's activity all over this pipeline route. So be empowered by that and always believe, because it's true in an age of social media, that your voice will make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim and Katie and Paul and Richard, our 4 outstanding panelists. We're going to open up now to questions from you. Not only do we say no to something, but we say yes to something as well. And one thing we're very proud of at GCC is to have a very active degree and certificate in renewable energy efficiency, where we're putting people out into the field, doing wonderful work in efficiency, putting up solar thermal, photovoltaics, all sorts of really good stuff. So I think sometimes it's easy just to say no, but we have a no and a yes here, which makes it even sweeter.
I'm pleased to be here with you folks on Earth Day. I'm always awed by the work that I know that you're doing. But in Jim's remark, and this is to everyone, Jim's remark that, in the beginning where he talked about, he didn't say misinformation, but the need for clarity and information. I follow the emails from the Hilltown Community Rights and from Mass Plan and from everyone else every day. And there seems to be a lack of understanding, or at least a contradiction in what the reality is in terms of what we're up against, and that transfers into strategy. And with all due respect to your strategy of the DPU, right here, there was a contradiction. FERC is in control, DPU is in control. You know, FERC has the final answer, DPU has the control. There's a contradiction there, but there's a greater contradiction in that FERC is seen by many as an agency that is supposed to regulate according to environmental regulations because of some environmental act. But it was revealed that their charter is to do exactly what they're doing, rubber stamp and stop local control, because of the Roosevelt era that needed to build infrastructure. And unless that is, I believe, if that's correct, and that has to be understood, that efforts, that they will do what they want to do, and that we're up against something larger than a democratic process. They're part of the industry that intends to do what they're going to do. So if that's true, I want to know what the whether a court strategy, such as the one that Boniface is embarked on, a court strategy to fight eminent domain on constitutional grounds, would be a more appropriate place for strategic energy and funds at this juncture.
First, regarding the contradiction between, does FERC have the final say, does the state have the final say? The DPU is a necessary step, approval of the contracts is a necessary step before FERC can have a say. So if we just sit back and let the DPU approve these contracts, then yes, FERC has the say. But if we all go in and challenge the contracts together, or then the municipalities come in and challenge the contracts, and the ratepayers and the organizations challenge them, and the Attorney General comes in, and the Attorney General's office does get involved in these proceedings. It is going to be, we already expect it to be a much bigger, much more involvement than it typically happens, than what happened in the AIM process, where the AIM is another pipeline that was recently approved by FERC, and in the precedent agreement proceedings, they just marched through. The Conservation Law Foundation was the only real intervener, and it was a quick proceeding. This is different. This is a huge project with so much opposition that we have a chance, if we act now, to just cut it off at where it matters to Kinder Morgan at the commercial viability level. But if we don't, then FERC gets to do what FERC does. Now, as far as what FERC does and whether it's legitimate, that is definitely something that needs to be challenged and is being challenged by Boniface, for example, pro bono. And so he is working that process. It is important for someone to be doing that. The Supreme Court and composition is also a question. So where things would go there is a question. I'm glad somebody is doing it. And certainly, if we keep having to go down if we go down the road and say the DPU approves the contracts, we can have grounds to appeal them to court. If FERC approves the application, we can appeal to court. So you can always go to court. That's part of the process. So we're not ignoring that branch of government. It's just we're not there yet. Except Boniface is heading there already.
I would just add the fact that FERC and DPU have final says over the process, it's actually not a contradiction. It's that there are different steps in this process where different entities have a different final say. And when we talk about FERC, we have to remember that this project isn't only about Massachusetts. So let's just say New Hampshire approved it, and people may or may not be aware. One of the big drivers of this even being talked about is the governor of Maine really wants this service for his state, for economic development, for whatever he perceives as the benefits. And I'm hearing now that the governor of Rhode Island might also feel that same way. She's newer. I don't want to put words in her mouth. And the governors of the New England states are meeting this week. It might have been today. So if FERC... Tomorrow? Okay. I knew it was soon. If FERC were to decide that this project were in the national interest or the matter of national security, I mean, I think they would have grounds to try to overrule even our DPU. So I mean, I don't find it a contradiction. I just find it that there's different players and different reasons why they're involved. And then to the second part of the question, I think the most effective strategy, if people want to stop this, is to use everything at your disposal. So whether it's legislative, regulatory, town meeting, lawsuits, where it probably is going to end up talking to your federal people, every single different step is going to make a difference. And no step is worth ignoring, or really, we can't risk ignoring any part of the process if that's what people are really worried about. And I'll just mention a little saying that's kind of old in politics. When you don't have any power, delay, delay, delay. And so the more things that happen, the longer this project drags out, the more economically unappealing it becomes. I mean, the more likely that it will be able to be stopped.
Thank you for having this forum. My name is Robert Cohen. I live in Bolton, Massachusetts, and the Worcester Lateral starts on my property. And it's a vacant lot next to the lot where I have my house, which we bought to keep pristine. So I have a couple questions. One, if I decide to put that land in Article 97, does it matter whether it's a CR or I gift it to the Conservation Trust or I gift it to the town? And my second question is there any benefit to, since at the beginning of the lateral they're going to put what's called a pig station, where they put this machine in to clean it, which gives off a lot of pollution and everything, but it also makes a tremendous amount of noise when they're doing it. I was told it's like a jet engine. Is there any benefit to the town putting any noise pollution limits in the town that might dissuade them, or other things of that nature?
I'll take your second question first. It's always important for towns to protect health and welfare, safety of their citizens. There's a lot of power in boards of health, and to the extent that the Board of Health would enact or the town would enact or has enacted something to do with sound, that certainly would be important. It's better to have that than not have it. I'll put it that way. It would offer some measure of protection.
One thing that's important to understand about Article 97 is that typically if you own it and a land trust holds the CR, it is not considered Article 97 land. And similarly, if the land trust holds it in an entirety without having a separate CR owned by the town or the state, then there has to be some governmental ownership there for Article 97 to apply. So, I mean, that is it's somewhat debated, but that's pretty much the way it goes. So, so that would be my, but as far as I can go with the advice is that having some kind of town ownership of one of the interests.
Hi, I'm Hattie. I just want to comment on a few things that have been brought up here. One thing is the need for this gas. I've been out and about in different towns, including in New Hampshire, and there are people that think we need this gas. They're buying that. David Keith was quoted in he wrote a letter to the editor, a commentary in the Greenfield Recorder, which is doing a great job of this, covering this, saying that the power that the pipeline could deliver, is projected to deliver, would deliver enough fuel to produce more than twice the combined power generated in all of New England by coal, petroleum, and nuclear fuel in 2012. What would we do with all of that? We can't even begin to think. Make a lot of popcorn? I don't know. It's going to be 2.2 billion cubic feet a day. And he says, and he is an energy analyst, that it's 20 times the production, the average output of a nuclear power plant like Vermont Yankee. Imagine 20 times what Vermont Yankee put out would be coming out of these pipes. So there is no way that we can use this. And that has to be really emphasized so people understand we are not dependent on this pipeline. The other thing is people seem to get more that we wouldn't get this gas. And there are towns, I've been going all around, like Berlin, 27% of their land is in conservation. Nobody there has town water. They all have wells and septic systems. And they understand they don't want pipes going through there. So The opposite happened in Fitchburg. I was in Fitchburg at an open house, and people there didn't see anything wrong with pipelines. So we still have to get that kind of information out. And I also want to talk, by the way, David Keith will be talking May 13th in Deerfield, Old Deerfield, at the community center there. So maybe people can come and hear him speak themselves. But the other thing is what Boniface is doing in Deerfield is working. One of the landowners there told me that a land agent had called her because she keeps refusing to allow him to survey. And he says, I really want to talk to you, but I can't come to Deerfield. Will you come to Greenfield to talk to me? So what Boniface has done is said, Kinder Morgan can't come into Deerfield in such a way that they're not. So that kind of legislation can be piggybacked. He says anybody can join, any town can join what he's done for free. He's doing this work for free. So if you live in a town where they're coming in, where they are, like I know they are in Plainfield and Ashfield, various towns, Dracut, whatever, we can keep them out, at least for the time being. Again, it would be delaying. And the other thing is keep abreast of what Mount Grace is telling us, because they're really tracking the parcels that are conserved in farms and state forests, and you can really see what would be destroyed by this pipeline going through. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul Lipke Montague. Most of the pipeline through my town is actually either on state land or on land owned by Northeast Utilities / Eversource. What are your recommendations for strategy in such a case? It goes across the Montague Plains, which is a conservation area, but there are other areas as well. So the state, which clearly, if you look at who's been appointed to DPU, et cetera, is not exactly the same as it's been in recent past. What are your thoughts about how to approach that?
Okay. Well, certainly it is under the Patrick administration. Well, they did not allow surveying on state land. I think they mostly were riding out their time and deciding they weren't going to have to make that decision. I have not heard that permission to survey has been granted on any state land to date. There were rumors that they might be meeting, the commissioners might be meeting to make a decision, but I haven't heard that that has happened yet. So we have been urging people to contact Secretary Beaton and the governor and say we don't want to allow surveying on state land for new gas infrastructure. Or protected state land, certainly. So that's one thing. Is they decide whether to allow the surveyors on, just the same as you would as an individual landowner. So tell them to say no. Also, recently the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Department filed with FERC a comment talking about the endangered species along the route in New England, and there were not very many, but in fact, there may have only been one in Massachusetts, and specifically in Montague, of all places. And it is a bulrush. It is a plant that is something that you can go out and look for. It grows in wetlands. So I know that tomorrow there's a Montague meeting, and they're talking about having a walk in the plains, and there's going to be May 10th. Okay, is when the walk in the plains is going to be, and so I think that that you can identify the wetlands then, and then the plant can actually be identified between August and October. Anyway, there's information out there. I'm sure somebody on the walk will know more, because this is a federally protected species. So throwing that up as something that has to be dealt with at the federal level is really important. There are a lot of state endangered species that basically FERC doesn't care about. You can ask, they can do a little bit, but whenever you have a federal cog that you can put in the works, you should use it. And so that's another issue, is whether there's any federal money that has been used to protect any land. That's a federal nexus. That is something to investigate. Because then you would have the federal government working at cross purposes with itself. We want to protect this land, but we want to put a 36-inch high-powered, high-pressure frac gas pipeline through it. That's a contradiction of purpose. Those are a couple of thoughts I have on that.
In order to make this viable for Kinder Morgan, they have to have a deep water port. That's my read on it. And Moody's has downgraded deepwater port constructions of LNG terminals. So not all of them are going to get built. So my question is, where's the funding going to come from? How is the deepwater port going to be funded? And is there the funding with decreasing oil prices? The big picture of the oil prices is with the president's recent temporary discovery that Iran and the United States can make a deal, and if that deal is made, it's going to open up the oil industry in Iran for the world, which is going to depress oil prices another 20%. If oil prices are depressed another 20%, just about all these frackers are going to go out of business. So I'm wondering if somebody here can comment on the financial aspect of turning this into liquid gas that can go over to Europe to make sure that we can marginalize Russia. I mean, here we have national security involved. Is that going to be invoked?
I think that economics is important, and that's comes in different ways. So the first way it's important is you need, as I mentioned, utilities to buy gas from this pipeline. There is a notion, and commentators believe, that if the pipeline is constructed, one of the things that's going to happen is the gas is going to be made available for export, and there's going to be mechanisms to make that happen, and that's behind the curtain in Kinder Morgan's on their whiteboard somewhere, that they're going to make this gas available for export. But economically, the first thing to do is to try to stop it so it doesn't even get to that point. If it gets to that point, then the opposition to the export and the exportation of gas has to be made. And that can happen in different regulatory proceedings, but I think that it's going to be, some commentators believe, as you mentioned, that the exportation is required or will be requested because of a need to serve Eastern Europe with gas from a geopolitical perspective. But for our perspective sitting here tonight, that's years away, and the thing to focus on is things that we can control, and we can't control the regulatory proceedings in Mass. We can't control the dialogue with our elected politicians and our legislators, and we can continue to take other actions, and some were mentioned before, with respect to not allowing access by different towns. Everything we can do, we should do, and that will mitigate hopefully any issue with respect to exportation later.
Another perspective on this, of certainly a 2.2 billion cubic feet per day pipeline, the vast majority of that would probably be going to export. But Kinder Morgan, in their filings, talk about the minimum size of the pipeline as being 0.8 billion cubic feet per day. That's not as big. They are saying that, they have been saying for 2 years now, that they have about 0.5 lined up in commitments from local distribution companies in New England. So they're in Maine trying to get another 0.2, and then they're hoping to get, and we just read about this in their earnings call transcript, they're hoping to get power contracts from generators as well, so that they can line up enough domestic need for the pipeline to push it through. And just another clarifying point about the DPU processes and each state approving the pipeline. Each state does not approve the entire pipeline. It piecemeal, or at least the way things stand, the way the laws are written and the regulatory proceedings go right now, they approve each in isolation. So in New Hampshire, it's 0.115 billion cubic feet per day, basically, and with National Grid, it's about 0.1, and with each of them has a little amount here or there. So if we knock off any one of them, then you get them down from 0.5 to 0.4, and it starts to look a little iffy. And also, they signed on together even though they have separate contracts, they came together as a group with very similar agreements. They've been working together on this plan, so we're wondering whether if you if you pull out one string, it might all unravel. So that's why we want to get involved in each separate proceeding. To just pull the whole thing down.
If I can make just one more quick comment on that. I think we can argue the economics of pipeline expansion all day, but let's not forget the moral issue of climate change. That ultimately any fossil fuel expansion is putting more heat-trapping gases in. It is lessening our ability to be more efficient, to expand the use of renewable energy, and fundamentally, in my opinion, this is not an economic issue. This is a moral issue. The future of human life on this planet is at stake. The planet's going to survive, with or without us. But our continued use of fossil fuel is a moral issue. And again, we need to present the economics as well. And I think Representative Marks said it nice. We use every tool in our arsenal to be militaristic about it. There's not a magic bullet here. It's sort of a buckshot approach, again, to be militaristic. But let's just not forget the moral imperative of stopping the expansion of fossil fuels.
Thank you. My interest in the problems with Kinder Morgan, I live in Leverett. I'm not immediately impacted by them coming onto land around me or in my town. However, with the letter writing, my understanding is that the new governor is in favor of the pipeline. And so any letter that gets written about this issue, if the name of the governor is included in that letter, their office cuts out anything from any paper that has his name in it. So I think as a strategy, we might look in that direction as well.
But what I can tell you is that with regard to renewables, they're making a much bigger impact than the industry would have us think. And when we look at worldwide, we're seeing the installed base growing faster than the fossil fuel generators combined. So there's there's starting to be a real clear split now with regard to how much electrical energy in particular is being generated by renewables versus fossil fuels. So that's the good news. But we've also got a problem here with regard to the kind of information that companies like Berkshire Gas are putting out about the need for gas. And they're calling they're imposing a self-imposed unilateral moratorium on new gas hookups because they say that there's not enough pipeline capacity for them to allow for new hookups. Now, the data on that we can show is incorrect, but that's the word they're putting out. So what we'd like to see and what we would like to get people to get more involved in is the fact that in towns like Amherst, which is a Berkshire Gas customer, has had one of the most successful solarized programs in the state. they have had a whopping increase in installations of solar PV systems in that town. Now, I will tell you that that is going to have an impact, because for those people who are installing these systems are also installing things like mini splits, which are adding heat to their home and thus reducing their need for natural gas. So these numbers are vitally important, and they're not really available in a quantifiable way yet that can be used, but that they're there, and we're trying to corral them so that we can use that information to demonstrate clearly that the need for the gas is not even static, it's going down. We also have studies coming in now that show that in the state of Massachusetts, the consumption of electricity has gone down. So we're starting to see this real dichotomy appear between what the industry is saying and what the reality is on the ground. So again, the impact on renewables is being seen and is going to start demonstrating that this gas is not needed. And the longer we can delay the construction of this pipeline, the more that information will come out, and the harder it will be for them to convince anybody that the gas is needed at all.
And just on as far as the delay goes and the technologies that are becoming more and more affordable, renewable storage, grid storage for renewable energy is becoming a reality, and Deutsche Bank has come out with a study saying that within a few years, in under 5 years, there will be massive availability at a cheap enough cost, Deutsche Bank, to store renewable energy on the grid, so that because there's always, people always come back when you talk about solar saying, but the sun doesn't shine at night. Well, now it can shine at night because of these sorts of technologies. And this is a very common, reaction that you get when people start talking about solar. So that's the answer. And actually, Senator Downing has a bill in support of energy storage systems. That's one of the bills that's, I don't know if it's moving yet, but it's been filed in the legislature this session. And also, I just want to talk about the big picture in New England. The way the problem is being framed is that we have insufficient pipeline capacity for our winter needs. Or insufficient pipeline capacity constraints. That's what you see in the paper all the time. Pipeline capacity constraints, winter crisis. But in fact, the problem is meeting, the question is, how do we meet our winter energy needs? The question is not how do we resolve pipeline capacity constraints. The question is, how do we meet our energy needs? There are lots of ways to meet our energy needs. And so I've been thinking back to, well, it's not even me thinking back because I was barely born, but looking back when at the plan that was in the 70s and 80s to divert the Connecticut River for Boston's water supply, because Boston was running out of water. They didn't have enough water. It was a crisis. They needed a pipeline. They needed to take the water from the Connecticut River and send it to the Quabbin. And, the people in Western Massachusetts didn't think that was a great idea. And they, a lot of environmentalists and a lot of local residents resisted this plan and, were written off for a few years. But eventually, they got the science and the economics behind them. They kept saying, if we fix the leaks in the system and if we implement conservation and get, better appliances, low-flow toilets and all the rest, maybe we can not need to divert the river. And you know what? Now Boston uses less water than they did in the 70s. They implemented all of these measures, and it ended up costing less than the diversion project would have. And so there are a lot of similarity. I mean, if you look back at the news, it's just amazing, and some of the players are the same. It's the industries. It was the people who are going to be pumping the water out of the river. Where it's a utility standing to make money. Who had lobbied and shown that there was this crisis, and this was the only way to solve it. So again, reducing those peaks. The peaks is really what the problem is. So cutting down on the peaks gets rid of the need to add all this pipeline capacity.
I'm from Winchester, New Hampshire, and very glad to be here, and we are very grateful for all this pioneering work and organizing that Massachusetts has done. Couple of issues. One, I hear about tariffs on one side. Is money? I wonder how much do they need the tariffs? And royalties. If this other Boniface initiative on royalties, if every town can require royalties and every landowner can collect a royalty, does that make the commercial viability? Does that affect commercial viability? Is that worth pursuing? And by the way, in New Hampshire, Governor Hassan's office tells me that tariffs are not legal. You cannot legally place a tariff on a utility bill. I'm wondering about that, and if you know anything about that. And finally, if anyone can comment on is the regulatory process in New Hampshire the same? Is there a DPU that's going to approve these contracts? Thank you.
I'll start to answer some of that. I'll start with the last one first. The regulatory process in New Hampshire is similar, except for Article 97. There's no equivalent of Article 97 that I'm aware of in New Hampshire. But in New Hampshire, there is an ongoing proceeding right now with respect to a precedent agreement contract being proposed by Liberty Utilities up there, and that is actively underway. Plan is participating in that proceeding.
And we're the only intervener. The AG's office is involved, but otherwise we're the only intervener in that process. Yes.
Yes.
There are several ways you can help. I mean, it certainly comes down to funding in many respects, because we have technical experts, we have the legal expert, and that costs money. But there are also, I don't know if at this point intervening separately, it's a little late to. You can move to join as a separate intervener, but in the process that's already ongoing, it probably makes more sense just to help us fund that effort. And some towns have been talking to us about how they can join forces, either as and this would be probably separate. A separate scenario in New Hampshire as opposed to Massachusetts, but we plan to intervene, in the same way that we did in New Hampshire here, and municipalities could join together as a separate group to intervene, and businesses, depending on who steps forward, businesses can intervene, ratepayers, all the different players get involved to, so that there's a lot of activity, and it's seen that there's a lot of different types of opposition there.
So the other question had to do with tariffs, and that comes up in a proceeding or a request by certain pipelines, not this one, to be funded in part by electric rates, electric ratepayers funding gas pipelines through an electric tariff. That notion of electric ratepayers funding a gas pipeline is new. It hasn't been done before. There's some question about whether it can be done by a tariff as opposed to legislation in each state. And stay tuned, but that's not this pipeline.
Yeah, but the New Hampshire PUC, it's not the DPU, it's the Public Utilities Commission in New Hampshire, and they just this week opened up, very recently opened up an investigation to look into how to get electrical distribution companies, the electric utilities, to buy into these pipelines. And a similar proceeding has been opened up at the DPU as well. So it's, that's moving forward at another level. And if it goes through, certainly Kinder Morgan would say, well, how about getting some of those electrical contracts for us too?
The last thing I do want to say is that, and you may be aware of this, but there's a lot of activity in New Hampshire ongoing right now. It's obviously the regulatory side, but there's a lot of legislators up there that are in opposition to the pipeline. So you may want to reach out to your legislator, make sure that he or she is part of that group, and they're going to be more and more involved in setting policy in New Hampshire in a way to accomplish an obstacle for this pipeline.
Yeah, one of the pieces of legislation that I think they're working on up there is to force Kinder Morgan to take an entire property and all improvements if they're going to take anything at all by eminent domain. So it puts a much greater burden on the company when faced with that prospect.
Yeah, I mean, the way I saw it was written, it would be to give the landowner the option to force them to take it. If you wanted, you could just let them put the pipeline in your backyard. But if you could also say, take the whole thing, and pay fair market value or just compensation. And if everybody along the entire route in one or two or three or four states did that, that would start to cost a little bit more. So certainly, these measures that make it more expensive do make it less appealing.
And things are different now. When you look at property value, in the old days, you could put a pipeline across it and nobody really kind of said boo. They would come and they would buy the property. Oh, it's got a pipeline on it. Okay. Now it's different. People are not buying properties with even a possibility of a pipeline going through it. So it's a very different economic climate, and it's something that we're all looking at, certainly those of us who are potentially impacted at the prospect of valuation. So, the New Hampshire legislature is definitely keen on that issue.
My name is Seaburn Fisher, and I live in Plainfield. I was interested in an organizing tactic that I heard about on the radio with major activists who talked about the importance of informing the investors of the company. Forget the company, but find the investors, and particularly if there are local investors, and go to their board meetings and make yourself known. My understanding is that, and you all know whether this is right or not, is that either Kinder or Morgan was formerly of Enron. Is that
Kinder?
Kinder. All right, so we remember California and what happened in California with a major scare tactic there, right, to raise electrical rates, as I recall. So these are, I so agree with the moral passion of Brian's, but it can't be fought on that basis, otherwise they wouldn't be putting this thing up, right? If the moral issues were of a concern to Kinder Morgan, we would not be facing any of this. So I want to look at where their economic weaknesses are and whether we know who their investors are. And these are smaller entities, and they are entities that don't want to be bothered. So I just wonder if you know. Thank you.
One of the things that that Richard was talking about earlier is sitting in on those calls with the investors, hearing their questions and hearing their concerns. Clearly, they are concerned about the permitting process here in Massachusetts for the shippers, Columbia Gas, Berkshire Gas, and those. They see that as a real problem. And so we have something of value there. We know where their pain point is, and we have a clear opportunity to exploit that. So this is an important strategy because, yes, money rules with these people. This is what they follow, like a donkey to a carrot. And so it's important for us to recognize that and take advantage of that any way we can. So again, what Richard is doing with regard to intervening in these permitting process is exceedingly important. It is one of the most it's like an Achilles heel to them. And one of the reasons why is because it's a state issue, not a FERC issue. So we can fight them in the state. We can fight them with our own state regulations and not have to deal with FERC. That gives us, if you want to call it home field advantage, then that's what it is. So to have someone like Richard who has this level of regulatory expertise and also what I like to call a very full Rolodex, where he has access to exceedingly competent special witnesses and experts who can testify in these proceedings, is of a very high value. And it's why we are constantly talking about the need to fund that, to get municipalities involved and get them to understand the value of getting involved in this aspect of the fight, because this is now. This is a strategy for right now. There are other strategies that will work later on, but this is the one that's going to work right now. And so, yes, let's recognize where we have advantage and exploit that time-wise that makes the most sense.
There's a pattern over the last 20 years for regulatory agencies to become more politicized and to really be creatures more than they had been in different times in the past of the executive branch. And you see that across all administrations in different states. So you see it in Massachusetts now, you see it in Connecticut, you see it in Maine, that's the reality. So that's the legal reality. And what that creates is uncertainty as to outcomes, because precedents don't matter as much as they may have in the past. You can't rely necessarily on what an agency has done to predict future behavior, but the solution is to work with huge groups, municipalities, and influence the legislators. They can pass laws which really do affect the agencies over time.
I did want to just address the Attorney General issue. People should reach out to the Attorney General. Yeah, it's true. You shouldn't assume that she knows everything that we know. She did participate in the statewide march against the pipeline when she was campaigning, but she has also said that she believes we need more gas. So there's room for some education there, and for her, if she hears from the people, whether you voted for her or not, if she hears from people, that can influence where the office goes.
Kinder Morgan had no idea what they were up against when they came into Western Mass. Before we leave, just a quick thank you to our four panelists. One more round of applause for their wonderful work.